It was a quiet morning at the hospital, the kind of morning where everything feels slow and ordinary. People were walking in and out, nurses were moving quickly from room to room, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. No one expected anything unusual to happen that day. Keanu Reeves walked in through the automatic doors. He wasn't surrounded by cameras or a crowd of fans. There were no flashes or screams. He was dressed simply in a plain hoodie and jeans, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. He looked like any other person walking through those doors. Just another patient there to see a Dr. Dot as he approached the reception. A few people glanced at him briefly, then went back to their own business. He gave a small, polite smile, holding the door open for an elderly man before he stepped inside. There was something calm about him, a quiet presence that didn't demand attention but seemed to fill the room anyway. Inside, he waited in the general area, sitting on one of the chairs that lined the hallway. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't ask anyone to notice him. He simply sat quietly, looking at the floor, hands resting on his knees, waiting for his name to be called. Then came the doctor. A man with a sharp voice and a reputation for being a little too confident in his own skills. He had seen many patients in his life, but today he noticed someone sitting in his waiting room that made him frown slightly. He assumed he knew what kind of person Keanu was just by looking at him. The doctor had a habit of being blunt, sometimes too blunt. He didn't really think about how his words might make someone feel. So, when he called Keanu into the room, he said a few things that were meant to embarrass him. Little comments about his appearance, a sarcastic tone in his voice, as if trying to test him or show who was in charge, but Keanu didn't react the way the doctor expected. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't roll his eyes. Instead, he stayed calm. He nodded politely and answered the questions carefully. Every now and then, a small smile would touch his lips, not mocking, but soft and kind, almost like he was saying, "It's okay. I understand." The doctor noticed the calmness, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of frustration. He wasn't used to people not reacting the way he wanted. Usually, his sharp words got the reaction he expected, whether it was fear, embarrassment, or confusion. But Keanu seemed almost untouchable, not because of fame, but because of the way he carried himself. Other people in the room noticed too. A nurse paused mid-step to watch quietly. Another patient looked over from across the room. There was a tension in the air, a quiet sort of attention that no one could explain. Something about this man made people stop and notice, but not in the way the doctor wanted. Keanu answered every question politely. He listened carefully to the doctor's instructions. He asked questions when needed, showing that he was serious about his visit, but never arguing or challenging the doctor unnecessarily. He respected the process. Even though he was being treated unfairly. As the appointment went on, the doctor tried again. This time, he made another comment, hoping to embarrass him further. He expected some reaction, some sign that he had won this small, unspoken battle. But again, Keanu stayed calm. He didn't let pride or anger control him. Instead, he focused on what mattered, his reason for being there. After a few minutes, the doctor started to notice something he hadn't expected. This man, sitting quietly and answering questions politely, wasn't like the others. There was no arrogance. There was no need to prove anything. And there was a sense of dignity. The kind that comes from a person who has lived through challenges and learned to carry himself with quiet strength. For the first time in the appointment, the doctor felt a little uneasy. He realized that his usual tactics weren't working. His words weren't shaking Keanu. They weren't causing embarrassment or fear. They weren't making him react. Instead, Keanu was showing something the doctor hadn't seen in a long time. Patience, humility, and quiet confidence. Keanu's calm presence made the room feel different. It was subtle, but everyone could feel it. The nurse who had paused earlier returned to her work, whispering to another staff member, "He's different. You can just feel it." Even though nothing dramatic had happened yet, the tension in the room had changed. The doctor, who had entered the room thinking he could assert control, now felt a small shift in his own attitude. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about this man was unusual. Something about him made people notice, not because he demanded it, But because of who he was inside, by the time the appointment ended, Keanu had done nothing extraordinary. He hadn't demanded special treatment. He hadn't shown off or revealed his identity. He simply had been polite, respectful, and calm. But that quiet behavior left a stronger impression than any loud or flashy action ever could. When he left, people in the room returned to their routine, but the atmosphere felt a little different. The doctor looked after him, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. Keanu walked out of the hospital the same way he had come in, quietly, simply leaving no trace of drama behind. But he had already made an impression, the kind of impression that would quietly grow long after he had left the room, and the doctor, who had come in ready to assert superiority, was left with a question he hadn't expected to face. Who was this man? And why did he feel so different from everyone else? After the appointment, the doctor couldn't stop thinking about the man he had just seen. He went back to his office, sat at his desk, and tried to push the thought aside. But no matter how much he focused on paperwork or patient charts, the image of that calm, polite, and almost untouchable man stayed in his mind. There was something unusual about him, something the doctor couldn't quite name. He remembered the way the man had responded to his sharp comments. Most patients would have reacted with anger, confusion, or hurt feelings. Most would have argued or at least shown some discomfort. But this man had simply listened. He had answered politely. He had never raised his voice or made excuses. And somehow, in that quiet way, he had made the doctor feel small. The doctor frowned and shook his head. He was used to being confident, used to being respected, and often feared. But this encounter had left a strange mix of emotions he didn't like. He felt frustrated at himself, almost embarrassed that he hadn't been able to rattle the man. And yet he was also curious. He wanted to know more. Who was this person, really? As the day went on, the doctor watched the other patients around him. He noticed how people treated him, the way they looked to him for guidance and approval. He thought about how easily he could judge someone based on first impressions. And he realized for the first time that day that maybe he had done that too quickly. Later, a nurse came by to speak to him quietly. "Doctor, did you notice who that patient was?" she asked, lowering her voice. Her eyes were wide with quiet excitement. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "I noticed him, yes. But he's just a patient, right?" The nurse shook her head. "You don't understand. That was Keanu Reeves." The doctor blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "What?" he asked. "Keanu Reeves," the nurse repeated. "He's an actor. Very famous. Movies, awards, everything. But he wasn't asking for special treatment. He was just himself." The doctor leaned back in his chair. He had known the name, of course. Who hadn't? But he had never met someone like this. And now he understood why he couldn't rattle him. It wasn't because he was untouchable or arrogant. It was because he had character, patience, and a humility that couldn't be shaken. Suddenly, the doctor felt a twinge of guilt. He thought about the comments he had made in the appointment. The sarcastic tone, the dismissive attitude, the little attempts to embarrass him. Keanu hadn't responded in kind. He had treated the doctor with respect, even when the doctor hadn't shown it. The rest of the day passed slowly for the doctor. He tried to focus on other patients, but his mind kept returning to Keanu. He remembered the soft smile, the calm demeanor, the way he had listened carefully. It was as if the man had shown him a mirror, reflecting how he had acted and how he might have hurt someone unintentionally. By afternoon, the doctor realized something important. He had judged a person too quickly based on looks and assumptions. He had assumed that a quiet, simple appearance meant the man was ordinary. He had assumed he could assert control through words. But none of those assumptions were true. And he began to feel the weight of his own pride. Meanwhile, across the hospital, Keanu moved quietly from room to room. He didn't talk about fame or status. He didn't introduce himself or make anyone feel awkward. He was focused entirely on the reason he was there, helping others in small, meaningful ways. Even the staff who recognized him didn't treat him differently. He had a way of making people feel normal, safe, and respected without any effort at all. Back in the office, the doctor pulled out his phone during a break. He searched for more information, curiosity mixed with awe. He read about the man's charitable work, about his kindness and generosity, the way he had quietly helped people without ever seeking attention. He saw pictures from hospital visits, foundations he had supported, people he had helped in ways most would never know. The doctor felt a mixture of surprise and shame. He had assumed this man's presence was ordinary. He had assumed his calmness was weakness or indifference. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Keanu's quiet, humble demeanor was not a sign of passivity, it was a sign of strength. A strength that came from understanding life, from living it fully, from knowing how to respect others and remain true to oneself. As the day went on, the doctor noticed small changes in himself. He found himself speaking more gently to patients, listening more carefully, and trying to understand before judging. He realized that this one encounter, one simple appointment, had already taught him more than many years of experience. He thought about how often people judge each other too quickly. How easy it was to assume things based on appearance, status, or first impressions. And he understood, for the first time deeply, that true character could never be measured by looks, words, or titles. By evening, the hospital was quiet again. The doctor sat alone for a moment, reflecting. He remembered the soft, patient eyes of the man who had entered his office that morning. He remembered the calm way he had answered questions, never defensive, never arrogant. He realized that this encounter would stay with him for a long time, a reminder of humility, kindness, and the power of quiet strength. He also knew that the story wasn't over. There was more to learn, more to understand, and perhaps a moment coming when the truth of who this man really was would be revealed fully. And when that moment came, the doctor knew he would see the world a little differently. The day ended with the doctor feeling both humbled and inspired. He had met someone remarkable, someone ordinary on the surface, but extraordinary in every action and gesture. He had been tested in a quiet way, and he had learned a lesson about judgment, humility, and respect that no book or training could ever teach. As he turned off the lights in his office and walked toward the door, he couldn't help but smile softly. He didn't yet know the full story, but he already understood this. Sometimes, the most ordinary-looking people are the ones who leave the deepest marks on our lives. And sometimes, the quietest encounters are the ones that change us forever. And the next morning, the hospital felt busier than usual. Nurses were rushing, patients were waiting in the halls, and the sound of footsteps and beeping machines filled the air. Yet, in the midst of all this activity, the doctor couldn't shake the thought of the man he had met the day before. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing patient files, but his mind kept drifting back. Something about the calm presence, the polite demeanor, and the quiet strength of the man was haunting him. The way he had handled himself in the office, it wasn't just patience. It was something deeper. As he went through his notes, a nurse came in, holding a folder. "Doctor," she said softly, "I think you should see this." He took the folder, curious but cautious. Inside were documents and letters that mentioned donations, private visits, and support for patients, details that weren't publicly known. And there, written in one of the letters, was the name Keanu Reeves. The doctor's heart skipped a beat. He had known the name, of course, but he hadn't realized the depth of this person's kindness. These weren't public gestures for recognition or applause. These were quiet, personal acts of generosity. Keanu had been helping patients, funding treatments, and visiting those in need, all without anyone knowing. He read through the documents slowly, feeling a mix of surprise and guilt. All the assumptions he had made the day before, the dismissive comments he had tried to make, the little attempts to assert authority, they suddenly felt so small, so meaningless. He had judged this man based on appearances and brief words, completely missing the true person underneath. At that moment, a nurse whispered something that made him pause even more. He's been visiting hospitals like ours for years, quietly helping patients without any publicity. Most people don't even know he comes. The doctor leaned back in his chair, trying to process it all. Here was a man who could have demanded attention, who could have been treated like a celebrity, yet he chose humility. He chose kindness over recognition. He didn't flaunt wealth, power, or fame. He simply acted with integrity and compassion. Later, during rounds, the doctor found himself observing other patients in a different way. He noticed the small gestures of care from nurses, the expressions on patients' faces, and how much a little kindness could mean. He realized that Keanu's presence wasn't just about fame, it was about human connection. It was about showing respect and care for every single person. No matter who they were, he couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. He remembered the quiet smile, the calm tone, the attentive listening. He thought about how easily people could be misunderstood, how judgments could be made too quickly, and how often appearances could deceive Dot by afternoon. He began to see small signs that others were starting to realize too. A nurse mentioned quietly to a colleague that she had met Keanu Reeves, and the word spread softly among the staff. Everyone who had interacted with him noticed his humility, his gentle presence, and the way he treated each person with dignity. The doctor felt a mixture of awe and shame. He had come in ready to assert superiority, ready to embarrass someone he thought was ordinary. And now he was realizing that he had been completely wrong. This man, this patient, had already shown him a lesson in humility and respect without even trying. He began to reflect deeply. How often do people misjudge others? How often do we assume things based on what we see on the surface? And how often do we miss the true goodness of a person because we are too focused on appearances or status? As he walked down the hallway, he noticed small details he had ignored before. A child holding a nurse's hand, a family member comforting a patient, the quiet dedication of staff members working tirelessly. He realized that the hospital was full of stories, full of people quietly making a difference. And Keanu's visit was just one of those stories, but it had left a deep mark on him. Later, he overheard a conversation between two nurses. One of them said, "He didn't want anyone to know he was coming. He just wanted to help." The doctor paused, letting the words sink in. That's when he realized something important. True kindness doesn't need recognition. True generosity doesn't ask for applause. And true strength isn't shown through words or status, it's shown through actions, quietly, consistently, and humbly. That evening, the doctor sat alone in his office again. He reflected on everything he had learned in the past 2 days. He had been tested in a subtle, quiet way, and he had learned something about himself. He had learned that assumptions can be dangerous, that pride can blind us, and that humility and kindness can leave a deeper impression than any title or fame ever could. He couldn't wait to see what would happen next. There was still more to learn about this man, more to understand about the quiet strength he carried. And the doctor knew, deep down, that the encounter would continue to change him. Long after Keanu had left the hospital, even in the quiet moments, the lesson stayed with him. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't demand attention. Sometimes the strongest lessons come from the calmest people. And sometimes a single encounter, even a quiet one, can change the way you see the world and yourself forever. The next day, the hospital felt different for the doctor. Even though everything around him looked normal, patients arriving, nurses hurrying, machines beeping, he couldn't ignore the thoughts swirling in his mind. The documents he had seen. Yesterday, the quiet words from the nurses and the memory of Keanu's calm presence kept returning. He had started the week ready to assert authority and maybe even embarrass someone he assumed was ordinary. Now he felt something completely different: curiosity, respect, and a little unease at how wrong he had been. Later in the morning, Keanu returned. This time he wasn't alone. He was visiting someone who was very sick, someone who had been struggling for weeks, someone who needed not just medical care but emotional support. He walked quietly down the hallway, carrying a small bag. Nurses and staff noticed him immediately, but he didn't stop, didn't ask for attention, didn't wave or smile for recognition. He moved with purpose, focused entirely on the person he had come to see. The doctor watched from a distance, trying to make sense of it all. Then a nurse whispered, "He's been helping this patient for months, covering medical costs, arranging treatments, and even speaking with the family to provide support. And he's done it all quietly, without anyone knowing." The doctor felt a lump form in his throat. He remembered how he had tried to embarrass this man, how he had assumed that someone so casually dressed and polite could be dismissed. And now he saw the truth. Keanu Reeves was not just a famous actor. He was a man who used his resources and time to help others in ways that would never make the news. Never go on social media, never be recognized by the world. Keanu knelt down beside the patient, speaking softly, encouraging them, listening. He was patient, attentive, and completely focused. He comforted the family members, offered words of hope, and made sure the staff knew he respected their work. Every action showed care, every word showed humility. The doctor felt a wave of guilt. He thought about his own behavior the day before. The small attempts to assert superiority, the sarcastic remarks, the subtle tone meant to embarrass him. In that moment, they all seemed so shallow compared to what Keanu was doing now. He realized that all the pride and confidence he had relied on in his professional life were nothing compared to the quiet strength of true kindness. As the visit continued, the doctor noticed something else. Other patients and staff who recognized Keanu were whispering, watching, and in some cases, quietly helping him. No one treated him like a celebrity. Instead, everyone treated him like a human being. And yet, his presence alone seemed to lift spirits. People smiled more, moved more confidently, and even the air in the hospital felt lighter. The doctor stepped closer, unable to resist. He watched Keanu help a young patient who was scared of a procedure. Keanu spoke gently, made jokes to ease the fear, and held the child's hand for a moment. The child's tears faded, replaced with a small, hesitant smile. The doctor realized that this was the kind of influence a person could have not through power, not through words, not through titles, but through genuine care, humility, and attention to others. Finally, the visit ended. Keanu stood, quietly thanking the staff, giving nods and soft smiles. He didn't announce his identity. He didn't leave a grand gesture. He simply walked out as quietly as he had entered, leaving behind a sense of warmth, respect, and hope. The doctor stayed where he was, feeling a mix of awe and shame. He had met many famous people in his life, but none had left such a quiet, powerful impression. He realized that his assumptions, his attempts to embarrass someone, and his pride had all blinded him to what truly mattered: kindness, humility, and action without expectation. Later, the nurse who had first explained Keanu's identity came by again. "Doctor," she said softly, "he's helped many patients in ways most of us don't even know. He's here because he cares, not because anyone asked him to." The doctor nodded, feeling something change inside him. He had always considered himself a good doctor, someone who cared for patients, someone who tried to make a difference. But now he realized that there was a higher level of humanity he had never seen before, a way of being that combined humility, kindness, and action without expectation of reward. For the rest of the day, the doctor moved differently through the hospital. He spoke more gently to patients, listened more carefully to nurses, and tried to be more observant of the little ways he could help. He realized that Keanu's example wasn't just about fame or generosity, it was about seeing the world through empathy and action. As the evening came, the doctor sat alone, reflecting on everything he had seen. He thought about how easy it is to judge someone based on appearance or first impressions. He thought about the pride he had carried, the unnecessary attempts to assert authority, and the shallow ways he had measured people before truly knowing them. And he realized that the quiet, simple actions of one person could change the way he saw himself and the world. The doctor also knew that the lesson would stay with him forever. He had seen the shocking truth, not about fame, but about what it meant to be truly human. He had seen how kindness could be powerful, how humility could command respect, and how actions, not words, defined character. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the man who had walked into his office calmly, politely, and quietly. He realized that he had been tested, challenged in a subtle way, and he had learned more from this encounter than from any book, lecture, or training session. That night, he left the hospital with a new sense of purpose. He knew that he had been changed not by a grand speech, not by a dramatic gesture, but by a simple truth. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who appear ordinary. Sometimes the most powerful lessons are taught quietly, and sometimes one encounter can alter your perspective, your behavior, and your understanding of humanity forever. The doctor understood that humility, patience, and quiet generosity could leave a mark far deeper than words or recognition ever could. And in that moment, he silently thanked the man who had walked into his life so calmly, unaware that he had already taught the doctor a lesson he would never forget. The next morning, the hospital felt calm, but alive with the usual bustle of patients and staff. The doctor walked through the halls with a quiet awareness he hadn't felt before. Everything seemed a little brighter, every interaction a little more meaningful. The memory of Keanu Reeves' visit lingered in his mind, teaching him lessons he could not forget. As he moved from room to room, the doctor noticed small details he had missed before: the nervous hands of patients, the subtle exhaustion in nurses' faces, the worried looks of family members. He realized that the way we treat people, even in small ways, makes a huge difference. He remembered Keanu's patience, his attentiveness, and the respect he showed to everyone, regardless of their position or status. The doctor began speaking to patients differently. He listened more carefully, asked questions that mattered, and offered encouragement without expecting anything in return. He found that small gestures, a smile, a kind word, a little extra patience, had an impact far greater than he had imagined. And each time he did this, he thought of Keanu and the quiet example he had set. During a break, one of the nurses approached him. "Doctor, you've changed already," she said softly. "It's noticeable. Patients are responding better, and the staff feel it too. Something about the way you're moving and speaking is different." The doctor smiled quietly, feeling both humbled and grateful. He realized that sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected people. Someone doesn't have to shout or demand attention to make an impact. Sometimes the way a person lives, the way they quietly care for others, teaches more than any speech or instruction ever could. He remembered the first day he had met Keanu. He had tried to assert control, tried to embarrass him, assumed he could read him like an open book. And he had been completely wrong. What he thought was weakness was actually strength. What he assumed was arrogance was actually humility. And what he had dismissed as ordinary had turned out to be extraordinary. The doctor thought about how often people judge each other too quickly. How often pride and ego get in the way of understanding someone's true character. He realized that life had given him a rare opportunity, a chance to learn from someone who had nothing to prove, yet had taught him a lesson he would never forget. Later in the day, he found a moment to reflect quietly in his office. He thought about the patient Keanu had helped, about the family members he had comforted, and about the quiet, generous acts that had gone unnoticed by most. He felt inspired, realizing that kindness doesn't need an audience and humility doesn't need applause. True generosity is measured not by recognition, but by the impact it leaves on others. The doctor also thought about himself. He had learned to see beyond first impressions, beyond appearances, beyond the superficial. He had learned to value patience, empathy, and human connection above ego or authority. He realized that the world could be a better place if people acted with quiet strength and genuine care. Just like the man who had walked into his office calmly and politely as the day came to an end. The doctor noticed the hospital staff moving with renewed energy, smiling more at patients, helping each other more willingly, and carrying a sense of hope. He realized that one person's actions, even quiet ones, can ripple out and touch many lives. Keanu's visit was not just about him. It was about inspiring others to act with kindness, humility, and understanding. That evening, the doctor paused by the window in his office, looking out at the city as the sun began to set. He reflected on the past few days, the encounter, the lessons, the revelations. He knew that he had been changed forever. He understood now that character is not shown through power, words, or status. It is shown through action, through compassion, through the small choices we make every day to treat others with respect and dignity. And in that quiet moment, he silently thanked the man who had come into his life so unexpectedly. Not for fame or recognition, not for applause or reward, but for the simple act of being himself, patient, humble, kind, and generous. That single encounter had left a mark on the doctor's heart, a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. From that day on, the doctor approached his work differently. He listened more, judged less, and sought to understand before making assumptions. He treated every patient, every nurse, every family member with a deeper respect and a more open heart. And though Keanu had long since left the hospital, the lessons he taught continued to live on in every small act of kindness the doctor shared. Sometimes the doctor thought life surprises us in the most unexpected ways. A quiet visitor, someone who seemed ordinary at first glance, could reveal extraordinary lessons. And the true measure of a person, he realized, is not in fame, power, or recognition, but in the humility, compassion, and integrity they carry quietly into the world. The doctor smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He knew that every patient he helped, every kind word he spoke, and every act of patience he offered was now inspired by the man who had walked into his life so quietly, yet changed it forever. And in the end, he understood this simple truth: the most remarkable people are often those who do not seek to be remarkable at all. The most powerful lessons come not from speeches or instructions, but from living with quiet dignity, empathy, and unwavering kindness. And that, he knew, was the gift Keanu had left him, a gift not of wealth or fame, but of humanity, humility, and heart.